Welcome everyone to Real Estate Horror Stories. My name is Mike McNamara. Thanks for joining us. And today we have Billy Alt. How you doing?
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself, how long you've been in the career, your focus, all of that.
So yeah, that's a open-ended question, right? Yeah. But we're gonna make it short, right? So my name is Billy Alt. I'm currently with Urban Nest Realty. I run the Alt Group, a small team, and I've been in the business since 2004.
Okay.
So I've been able to see the ups and
everything.
downs of real estate,
Yes.
especially in Las Vegas, which is good and bad. We're kind of around that again, right?
Yep.
I'm originally from Long Island, New York. I went into the Marine Corps at 18, and I served 6 years.
Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you. And that became, long story short, my passion was to help veterans
with the relocation.
Learning how to use their benefit, a VA benefit, because
Gotcha.
there's a lot of misinformation out there. And then also growing up, my parents rented most of the time, and watching the rich dad, poor dad scenario,
Yep.
I always was attracted to real estate. And finally, when I moved out to Vegas in 04 or 03, I got my real estate license, and I was able to put those two together.
Gotcha. So 03, that's when the market was booming and going kind of crazy, and right before the crash.
So right before, 03 it was starting, 04, 05, 06 was amazing, too good, and then 07 and 08 was the end of
it. And that's when I got in, was
good timing.
So,
yeah. So, but I mean, that's always, it's always good to get in. People make the most amount of money and get the most traction when everybody's run out the door, right?
Exactly, and learn the most skill. Too.
Yeah, exactly. So
cool.
But, so I'm excited to talk about, what do we want to talk about?
I want to know a horror story, something that will educate agents, help them with their businesses. When we do a lot of transactions, everything's not going to be perfect.
Right.
And so I found myself teaching agents just based off of my experiences. And so I'm sure you have a good experience.
I've been through a lot of transactions since that time, and never has any transaction been the same.
Right.
So I'll talk about one that was in COVID, during COVID, and it happened to do with a Vietnam veteran, which is a special passion for me, because as you know, those Vietnam guys got a bad gig coming home, right? They were not welcomed home, they had to hide, all that stuff.
Right.
And a lot of the times they came home and didn't know their benefits.
Okay.
Or sometimes they were able to buy a house, but they didn't know that they could buy multiple times, right?
Is that due to lack of education in that space when they come out, programs?
So yes, I mean, the way I look at it is it's twofold. Their attention span at that point was going and getting out, right? And B, at lack of education on the VA side, things are getting better, but it's still not perfect, right?
Okay.
But those guys specifically, you have a little bit of heart for because they went through the most of it, right? So this gentleman, I'm just going to call him Bob. I don't want to say his name, right?
That's perfect.
He was a VA buyer, owned a house already. He didn't know he could buy another one, so I had to educate him on that, which was a great thing. We had him qualified to buy. His credit score was right there, use his VA and keep his house and rent out the one he had.
Yeah.
He wanted to go out to Pahrump to be with his buddies. He was into fixing cars and all that, and his buddies live across the street. So we found basically a double wide, which you could get a VA loan on. It's a little bit more cumbersome.
I did not know that.
It's got to be actually fixed. It's got to be permitted to the ground. So you have to have an engineer come out and all that. So that was the case. So we get into escrow, and with the VA loan, not common in the Valley is well and septic.
Yep.
In that scenario, there was. And both of them had issues with the water quality, and the septic was backed up. So we had to go through that process of getting that corrected. It was not quick and it was not cheap.
Yep.
So that was a fight back and forth between buyer seller, and I say a negotiation, not a fight.
Right. Is that during your due diligence?
That was during due diligence, and we had to extend because of the time to figure it all out.
What is it? I'm going to just keep asking a few more questions. What does it typically cost to do those inspections? Obviously, it can vary.
So the inspection scenario, because we had to get somebody that was specifically out there, because Pahrump and Las Vegas is far away.
Very different.
I'm going to say $200-$400 per. And then they charge for digging it, and then they charge for finding this where it is because they didn't know.
Yep.
And then whatever you have to do to treat it and to get it better, and then
to get it better.
So there's a lot. It could be thousands, right?
Right.
And in that scenario, I think it was. We got the seller to pay. So at that point, Then we realized that they had solar. We knew it, but we didn't know the scenario because the listing agent didn't disclose it correctly.
Okay.
So we get down and he had to take over this solar. It was a power purchase agreement,
Perfect.
which
Okay.
if you don't know the difference, there's lease, there's own, and then PPA, which is power purchase agreement.
Correct.
Another deadly story in my life is I own a roof of somebody's house because we didn't understand that one, so I'll never do that again. Right? $17,000 experience, right?
Go.
So solar and me are not
learn
friends.
from our mistakes, right?
But we learned through it. So I stay in my lane now out of solar. But my point is, he, as being an elderly Vietnam vet, was not understanding that part of it.
Gotcha.
He couldn't understand it, so it took us a lot of education to get there, to
Gotcha.
talk to people. And as you know, if you've ever done a solar deal, they're not very quick to answer the phone or get back to you.
Takes
So
forever.
it was
Yeah.
a process. So now let me go back a step. This was during the time where the rates were low.
Yep.
November of that year.
Yep.
And then it ended up closing in May of last year, right? So in that time frame of these stalls, remember the rates were low and things got up in his credit score. So that's something to pay attention to.
Okay.
So
Yes.
something that, we get to that point now, and then he missed a payment on one of his credit cards or something. He was just,
Which threw off.
it wasn't he couldn't afford, he just missed a payment. So the lender calls me and says, hey, we got a little bit of an issue. I'm like, yeah, what's the problem? He missed a payment. Well, what are we going to do? Well, he has to sell his house now to get off that debt. So now we're in the middle of a transaction, and the listing agent's like, hey, we need to close this.
A transaction that's already been
Yes, this is already,
pushed.
I mean, I can't even tell you, it's probably a month and a half in, right? So due diligence. So now I'm begging the other side, hey, give me to him. So we get through that. We get his house listed. He happens to be a hoarder. So that the amount of effort that I had to put in to get that house to show ready. And now this was a market where I could sell it fairly easy, but even that house was not
Easy to sell.
Yeah. So we did get there. We got a buyer on it. That buyer fell out once. We went through a second buyer. So we're in this whole thing, begging. Then the seller goes into bankruptcy with the house.
That he's purchasing?
Yes. After all that, right? I'm like, well,
Was the agent not aware?
the agent didn't know.
Okay.
So we called him up. I'm like, why would you put the house in a bankruptcy when you're already in? Oh, he didn't know. His lawyer just did it. So now we go in. I've never done this before out of all those years. We go in and had to pull it out of bankruptcy. And don't forget, this was time where the COVID, like everything's virtual, right? So to get the courts to reverse something, take it out of a bankruptcy and get the attorneys to do it is not only costly, but it's time consuming. So also what's going on in this time, the rates have gone up.
Yeah.
So now his qualification is giving. My commission was donated. The other side donated. It was pro bono.
At
My
this
office
point,
was
you're
just like
doing this
all
for
in,
free,
right?
and let's
This
just get
was
this thing
my
closed.
pro bono for that day, right? So at the end of the day, we then get down to VA required repairs on this double wide.
Let's add some more stuff.
So I don't know if I lost money, but I definitely didn't make any money. But we all put in between lender, title, realtor, right? Everybody. And this guy sold his house. We finally got that done. I was able to get him into a lease option, lease back. Where he could stay there for so many days. An investor bought it, thankfully, and they gave him 60 days because that house needed work too. Got it all done. Got the solar done. And today, that gentleman is a homeowner. And
that is surprising that you kept that together.
At one point, we were so vested. And you know this. It's not about the commission.
Correct.
Sometimes it's just doing the right thing, right?
For me, it's all the time. I'm very. I tell a lot of people this. I'm very careful about looking at the commission of what I'm being given.
Right.
I don't.
As a matter of fact, that's a lawsuit coming down the line, right? But I would never look at the commission. Now, would I negotiate for a better deal?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But by all means, if they said no, I'm still doing that with integrity, right? And it all plays out in the end. And we live in a business of referrals, right? If you do the right thing and you do my simple business is shaking hands and meaning it and doing the right thing, right? Yep. It's not that hard.
I've had literally where this was my second year in, my manager told me to write an addendum a certain way to put my client in a lawsuit. She won the lawsuit, but it cost her $15,000. I gave her my entire check.
Because that's good karma.
And she came back.
Yeah,
she came back. She bought $1 million property. And so, but most agents don't behave that way.
You didn't have to do that.
No, and I didn't have to do it. You're right. So Is there anything that you would, from this experience specifically, is there anything that you would change in your business, do differently? I mean, this is really tough because it's a lot of unforeseen issues, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, my TC, we have a list of things we go through. I mean, I don't even know, besides maybe a little bit more questions on the way in of how I would have figured these out, because there's things you find out and things that you can't control, out of our control scenarios.
Yeah.
So honestly, I don't have, like, I mean, maybe the solar, I could have had a good conversation with prior to going into the escrow, so it wasn't a thing, but that didn't kill the deal. It was him missing the payment and the rates going up,
things
market conditions, like the seller going to a BK, right? And
all
I mean, it was a tough one, but hey, you know what? That's when you learn and you just get better at your craft, right?
And like you said, that is a client for life.
Yes.
And that's also a client that's going to talk about Billy Alt to everybody.
I mean, I hope so, right? I mean, he may not know, he's an old grumpy man, but like we love him, right? Like I gave him a flag that says home and a free cause, and that to me is gold, right? And we in our office will always go back to that, and we're like, remember, today isn't so bad. Remember this one, right? You know, so it's
and also we had these long deals in 09, 10, 11 with short sales. I mean, there were short sales that went 2 years, 2.5 years.
I had a first short sales I was almost in a contract with recently. I'm trying to explain to this buyer, all right, you have a FHA loan, but this is what could be the case. I've been there and I have that experience. We have that experience now. So if that does happen, and it probably will, more people, unfortunately, that had bought recently that are in bad harm's way with financials, might have to go through it. So,
or whatever
but having somebody, now that we have that experience, we can educate on the front end way better. So that's going to be a big deal for people. And emotionally,
it's not going to be as messy.
Emotionally stable. Now, you can't control what the banks do, or I hope they got better, but I won't put my word on that. But, you know, it's a business. But, I mean, dealing with people is our game, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So emotions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. My last question. A book that you would recommend to agents in the industry, whether they've been here and they're 15 years in or they're a brand new agent.
Right. So there's a few books I'm reading, and I'm good at reading like the first 5 chapters and getting off, right? So I'm a squirrel, right? But I finished, when I walk my dog, I listen to it, the audio, the 12-week work week.
Yep.
And
12-week year.
I'm sorry. Year. Yeah, that's a long work week. 12-week year. See, I didn't even get that right. But I really love, with me, and I don't know about you, I need to have something to look forward to, like a break. Yeah. Like, you know, and a goal to hit.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you could be complacent or you just get burnt out, right? And not to say you don't do both in between, but the 12-week thing really works and it makes sense.
Yeah.
On how
our team just finished.
Are you? Okay,
our team just finished it. The beginning of the year was our first 12-week year that we did. We had a prospecting competition going on at the same time because we're in the industry right now where you have to do 3 times the amount of work to get paid the same amount of money. Right?
You have to grind.
It's grind time. Yeah. And so for me, I agree with you. What I like about the 12-week year is I used to always set full year goals. And then 6 months or 3 months in, I'm like, oh, it's okay. Yeah. You know, I've got time.
I'll knock it down.
I've got time. And so now when you break it into these quarters, you know, it's hustle time. Like you have no choice.
I mean, Christmas is 8 months away.
Right.
Right? Like it happens.
There's a lot more accountability around it. We have our assistant keep us accountable for the goals that we're setting. Yeah. And it's not just on a real estate side of things, it's also on a personal side of things. Which I think is important.
I took a lot on the personal side with my family, and we all have kids, right?
Yeah.
A lot of lessons that, you know, work and life have to balance, or at least the best you can.
The best you can, right. Well, I appreciate your time.
Thank you, my friend. I
appreciate
it.
man.
Thank you. Wish you all the best.
Sweet.